just want to talk a bit about how you're going to, consider this notion of the flesh tone. And for each person, that's of course different. One of the easiest things to do here is to always refer to these basic things, like the color wheel, for example. Right? We have, or you have, an image of yourself that you're referring to that includes the picture in color of yourself. You also have your own flesh before you as you're looking at it. And that goes for areas that are highlight, have more highlight, or darker where there's not as much light. Again, you're referring to the picture. So as I look at this, the key things here is not so much these fully intense colors, but what happens here in these ranges of tints and tones. However, what I can do when I start is consider I can hold my hand up here, where am I going here in terms of the particular area of tone and tint with the base color that I'm going to use for myself here. I'm probably going to start somewhere in this area right here, dipping into greens and violets for these darker areas too. Right? I've made a little chart here just to practice to show this, where you can see these kinds of colors here as they relate to some of those lights and darks on that picture. What I have here is now taken some of those colors. Right, I have here on the little palette, I've also included some of the gloss medium that I have here. So what did I do? Right, I went and I reached into these reds and into the yellows in both the warm and the cool palette. As we can see here, we have cad red light, alizarin crimson. I also have some yellow here and some white, and I used some ultramarine blue. So in essence, what I wanted to do with that blue and that yellow was to be able to create the neutrals in those reds and orange ranges. Right? Remember how you're neutralizing colors, you're going across the color wheel. It can also help you get into some of these shadow areas when you're painting. So I have mixed up the cadmium red light and the alizarin crimson to get a base red somewhere in the middle, right? And then I used some white to lighten that color. And I pay attention to how close it looks to the portrait. Right now I have this gloss medium and varnish here because I want to show you ways that you can apply some of this paint. Let's just take a look here at the bridge of this nose for starters, where we're going to lay down a bit lighter color there. Now I can reach in while that's still wet, or I can dab some of this medium if you have it, and I can lighten that even more while the paint is wet. I'm following some of these guides I made using the pencil to show where it's lighter or darker. I have light, middle value, darker value, then getting darker where I created this kind of violety color for the dark areas. I have one brush, I have another brush here, and I have a third. You have 3 or 4 brushes. Let's go ahead then and look here. And you see this is a little darker. While this paint is still wet here, I can take that slightly darker value. If that looks a little bit too dark, and it does, I can just pick up some white here and lighten that up a little bit. Now that still looks a little bit darker. I'm going to use some medium there. I want to keep this paint wet as I go along, so I can blend that back into itself. You see it gets lighter here. I'm going to jump back to my lighter brush. Again, here I'm dabbing into this medium. Look, you don't have to do that. You could even use a little bit of water. You don't want to thin this color much here, these colors much. But you want to be able to kind of blend them as you go along there in the creation of that nose. I jump back here. Some of you might be adept at using the brush in such a way that you can use one brush to do that. I'm going to take a third brush here now where you can see it's a little darker right here. Remember, you have bristle brushes to put the color down, and you have the nylon brushes, and they will each, as you know at this point, operate a little differently. If you want to get more of a smooth application, then once you have this paint down here, you can use that nylon brush instead of the bristle brush as you go along. We can still see that's a little light all the way up there, and it starts to get a little darker. So I'm going to jump back in with this brush here. Here's another example here. I just tapped a little bit of water there. You can see here, I'm somewhat mixing the color even on the palette, right? I'm jumping back now because we have this darker area here where I have the eye socket. Could even be a little darker. I'm just going to tap some of that blue in there that I already have. Again, I've mixed lighter, middle value, a little darker, and then darker, so I can push those if I need to make them a little darker as I apply this, especially this kind of cooler value like that. So I have the lighter brush, and I'm just going to come in here and create that area there. I grab that lighter value with some of that white. So you can see I'm getting this kind of blended effect as I move from area to area there, right? That's why I have 2 or 3 brushes, and I've pre-mixed the lights and the darks of the face as I go along. So it allows me to just reach into that value as I'm observing what I'm painting and continuing along here. As you can see, this area here where it goes from light and it gets a little darker, let me just finish up some of that. Let me lighten, let me wet some of this, grab some white to lighten that up. You can actually grab a little more white. There's a little bit of highlight there. It's not white, but it's lighter skin. Jump back to my brush that was that kind of middle value there. I'm using the brush in the direction here that I see the kind of the face moving here. And then I jump back to my slightly darker area here. Take my brush, which is lighter, come back in while it's still wet with some of that paint. Again, I take the darker one. I'm looking at this area here. See how lit this part is? This is not quite as light. So when I take the lighter brush, I'm going to reach back into that middle value area, which is still light, but not as light. Begin to paint that. Take a look at this part here as we get to the lips. And again, I'm paying attention to those colors. And you stop and you take a moment to consider what those lips actually are in terms of their color. But here I'm just going to jump over here so I can get over to this part where it's a little darker. I'm going to use some of the medium. And that might be a little dark. That's okay because I'm going to take the brush I was using for that middle value there. So I can blend that in and show that part that goes into the neck. See, it's a little lit area right there. And then back to where it's a little bit of that middle value. I like that to be a little cooler, so I grab some blue and violet. And one last time, and I'll take my lighter brush here where the chin begins to happen right there. Okay, so if you continue that back and forth process, again, having mixed up 3 or 4 or 5 even of the value shifts of the face, lightest, not so light, darkest, not so dark, a little less light, these different value shifts, keeping your paint mixed there as you create the lights and the darks on each plane, and you can move quickly across the face and kind of get this more fluid feeling to the flesh as it moves.